Hey everyone, this is Homemaking with Rebecca. Today we're making an einkorn sandwich bread recipe. This is a yeast recipe and it comes together in a little over 2 hours. So we've got yeast, sugar, salt, melted butter, water, and einkorn flour. We're going to be using just the all-purpose einkorn flour today. I'm going to be using my KitchenAid mixer, and then I have 2 loaf pans here. I have a Lodge cast iron loaf pan and then a Pampered Chef stoneware loaf pan as well. So we're going to get started by putting 2½ cups of water in our KitchenAid mixer bowl. Then I'm going to sprinkle over 1 tablespoon of active dry yeast. And then I'm going to put in a 1/4 cup of sugar. So you just want to let this sit for about 3 to 5 minutes so that yeast can start getting activated and it'll start bubbling up. You'll start seeing the bubbles form in there. So I like to give it a little stir and then let it sit for about 3 to 5 minutes. Come back and check on it, and you should start seeing some little bubbles come up from the bottom there, and you'll see that your yeast is dissolving, and then you'll know that it's ready to go. So now we're going to pour in a 1/4 cup of melted butter. You could also use a neutral flavored oil there. And then we're going to put in 2½ teaspoons of salt. And then we're going to put in our all-purpose einkorn flour, 7½ cups of that. Now this recipe is very specific to einkorn. If you try to use white flour, it wouldn't work the same. If you want a white flour bread recipe, I have one of those. You can just check in my playlist. But this is specific to einkorn. And now we are going to put our dough hook on and we're going to let it mix up. So we're just going to continue to mix this until all the flour and the liquid ingredients get mixed together and it kind of forms a ball on that dough hook. And then we're going to continue to mix it and knead it for about 8 minutes. So once it all kind of comes together, I'm going to set my timer for 8 minutes. You can see it's come together there. I'm just going to let it sit there and knead for 8 minutes, and it will just make the dough a lot more soft and stretchy so it's not as crumbly. Einkorn dough tends to be very sticky, so it works really well to knead it in this KitchenAid mixer. If you don't have a mixer that can knead it, I would just suggest letting it rise for maybe an extra 30 minutes or so, and that can kind of help with it not being as crumbly. So you can see here we've gotten to the end of the 8 minutes, and you can see how soft and stretchy the dough looks. And so we're just going to stop the mixer and we're going to scrape down the dough off the dough hook, and then I'm just going to let this sit for about 45 minutes to rise. And I like to cover it with some plastic wrap while the dough is rising. So I'll just cover that and we're just going to let it sit there for 45 minutes. So this is what the dough looks like after its first rise, and we're going to get it moved over to our other workstation and get it made into some loaves, and then we'll let it rise a second time. So I'm going to first get my pans greased, and I've got some melted butter here, and I'm just going to wipe it all along the bottom and the sides and the creases, especially if they have real sharp creases like this Lodge one does. You want to get it in there so that the bread will release really good when it gets done cooking. So I'm going to get that good and greased, and then we're going to make our loaves. So you just want to flour your work area really well, and then we're going to get all our dough scraped out of our bowl here, and it's going to be fairly sticky, so you just know that from the beginning. That's why we were going to put lots of flour there. And then I'm going to cut it in half. I used this bench scraper and ended up sticking to it. I should have just stuck with my bowl scraper, but I'm going to roll it around in some flour here, and then what I like to do is I just like to press my dough out and really flat to kind of get those air bubbles out, and then I'll fold it like I would a letter into thirds. And then I'm just going to take it from the bottom up and just kind of roll it onto itself really tight. And then just kind of press the seams closed along the ends and on the edge there. And then we'll just put it in our loaf pan. And we're going to do that with both of these. And then we're going to let them rise for about 30 minutes or so. Now I've taken the same plastic wrap I was using earlier and I've buttered it really well so that the dough won't stick to it, and I'm letting it rise, and so you can see here that it's risen for about 30 minutes. I like for my dough to get just above the edge there. When you look at it from the side, you can see that it's risen and it's nice and domed, and so we're going to have our oven preheated at 375 and we're going to stick that in there to bake. I really like how quick this bread comes together, and I can just use the all-purpose flour that's sitting on my shelf and make it. I love to also make the fresh milled flour and sourdough and things like that, but sometimes if I don't have a lot of extra time or I haven't planned ahead, I'll just throw this together so the kids can have some sandwiches and stuff, and it comes together fairly quickly and they love it. And sometimes it's just nice to have a really soft kind of a white flour bread. So you'll know that this is done because it'll be nice and brown on top, and then I like to thump it and you'll get kind of a hollow sound, and that's another way that you can know that it's done. So we're just going to let this sit for about 10 minutes in the pans, and then we'll remove it from the pans and let it cool completely. There we go, it's all finished. What I like to do is freeze one loaf after it's cooled, and then we'll eat the other one, and then I pull the one out of the freezer so it keeps it really fresh. And we might like to make toast out of this and sandwiches, and it's really good. So I hope you enjoy this recipe and hope you have a great day. Thanks for watching.